Well, we have a great turnout already, and we just went broadcasting live. So with that, I would like to welcome you all today to today's session with Helen Dennis. We're so pleased to have her here with us. I know we have a great turnout, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. I'm Julie Corlett from the Southern California News Group. Welcome to the Healthy Living Expo, or our virtual expo. Today, I want to just go over a couple housekeeping things for you to help as we maneuver through this virtual event. All of our attendees are muted and off camera, and that is so that we can focus on what Ms. Dennis has to say. But you do have the opportunity, once she's done and throughout the session, to ask questions through the Q&A that's on the bottom of your screen, or you can add to the chat. When she is done with her presentation, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. So with that, I would like to introduce Helen Dennis. She is a nationally recognized leader on issues of aging and new retirement with academic, corporate, and non-profit experience. She has received awards for her university teaching at USC's Davis School of Gerontology and for her contributions to the field of aging, the community, and literary arts. She's the editor of 2 books, author of over 100 articles, and a frequent speaker. Helen just completed 19 years and over 900 weekly columns on successful aging for the Southern California News Group, which reaches over 1.6 million readers. Additionally, she has assisted over 20,000 employees to prepare for the non-economic aspects of their retirement. She is a co-author of the Los Angeles Times bestseller, Project Renewment, the first retirement model for career women. She is recognized by PBS Next Avenue as one of the nation's 50 influencers on aging. And with that, I welcome you, Helen.
Well, thank you, Julie, and hello to everyone who has joined us on this virtual expo. I have to start by admitting something, and Julie, I know you're still on, but I have to make an admission. So when you asked me to participate in this expo, and I said, delighted to do that, and then you said, well, give me a title of something you want to talk about. So I thought for a moment, I said, how about aging and thriving during the pandemic? Are you kidding? So I let that to rest for a while. And then I got to my computer, had this empty screen, and I said, what in the world was I thinking? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have high unemployment. We have mental health issues. We have economic issues. We throw in a fire for good measure, maybe another earthquake. So what in the world was I thinking? And then I reflected on some correspondence I had with Dr. James Buren, who was the founder of the Andrus Gerontology Center at USC and its first dean. And towards the latter part of his life, he ended his correspondence in a really different way. Instead of saying, sincerely yours, yours truly, he said, have good days. And that really struck me. And I thought, well, maybe this is what it's about. We have this world going on around us, a lot of problems. We try to help a little way that we can, but maybe this is all about compartmentalizing and looking at actually having good days. Next. So maybe this is actually how I felt when I said, looking at my computer saying, what do you mean thrive? So this is how we all may be feeling because so much turmoil is going on. Next. And I suppose all of us are surviving. So what does it mean to survive? It means to bounce back. It means to come back from adversity, hardship, or danger. Next. But I want to suggest that surviving isn't good enough. And I have the belief that we all have the potential to thrive. So what does thrive really mean? It means we get better at something. Of course, that could be a golf game or storytelling or bridge. It means being good at something, maybe a good friend, a good communicator. It means to develop and grow. It means being grateful, fortunate fortunate for our health, our security, and it's about feeling good about life and about yourself. But I also believe that thrive is an intention. It doesn't happen automatically. You know, it's actually a mindset. And so what I'd like to do in our time together is actually three things. First, I'd like to talk about what do we know about older adults pre-pandemic, and they will just be a few selected items. And then what do we know about older adults during the pandemic? And then the third part is, what is this silver lining we're talking about? Next. So there are four things I want to address about what do we know about older adults. A little bit about resilience, happiness, managing emotions, and also religion. Next. So let's start with resilience. Next, there we go. So let's start with resilience. Okay, so this is now pre-pandemic. So it means we really recover from very difficult experiences. We bounce back. In fact, there was an article in the Journal of Geriatric Nursing that said older adults, despite their social background, their economic problems, their personal experience, and even declining health, they are resilient, they bounce back. And it's interesting that people, older adults who are resilient, share some common characteristics. And when I talk about them, think about yourself and think if you can think of yourself in these terms. They think about new ways to solve problems. They have a certain amount of control over their lives. They think of themselves as survivors, not victims, and they are able to ask for help. Next. So the other aspect we want to look at in terms of characteristics of older adults pre-pandemic is happiness. So this is based on work by a man named Jonathan Rauch, who wrote something called and developed something called the happiness curve. And what he found is that people in their 20s and 30s are happy. Then there's a dip in their 40s, late 40s. And then as they approach going through 80, they become happy again. So there is a dip. But all in all, you can say in general, as a general characteristic, older adults indeed are happy. Next. The other thing we know is that older adults seem to manage their emotions very well. In fact, and we can say this pre-pandemic, mental health actually improves with age. And also, older people tend to rate themselves higher on mental health than actually younger people. Next. And then there's religion. It seems that belonging to a religious community has some very positive psychological effects. It helps individuals be positive and hopeful about life in general, even about illness. And what the researchers have found is that belonging to a religious organization is the largest source of social support for older adults outside their family. Next. And I think the big umbrella over all this, the big umbrella is wisdom. And I loved President Jimmy Carter's definition of wisdom. And that's the ability to exercise good judgment on important but uncertain matters. And the important piece here is uncertain matters, okay? And Dr. Gene Cohen, who died several years ago, he was a geriatrician, a psychiatrist at George Washington University. He said wisdom was a product of age, smarts, emotional, and practical experience. Next. So those are a few characteristics of what we know about older adults pre-pandemic. So now let's talk about them during the pandemic. And the information I'm going to mention next is based on a very recent study that was done by Ken Dykewald with AgeWave, his company, and Edward Jones Financial Advisors. So this started sometime in March, April. And what they did is they surveyed 9,000 people, 5 generations, both in Canada and the US. And they came to a conclusion. Their conclusion was that older adults are managing better during the pandemic than younger people. Next. And so they asked the reason why is this happening? Well, Number one, older adults do have financial safety nets. That does not mean that there are not economic hardships with older adults, but this is now a study, okay, 9,000 people. And first of all, older adults, about 3/4 of them own their own homes, so they don't have mortgage payments. Second, if they're over 65 and work 40 quarters, they receive Social Security. And third, many of them receive pensions. Younger people do not have that financial safety net. Next. And then we get back to mental health. Their study found that older adults indeed report better mental health than younger people. However, younger people did report that their physical health was better. Okay, next. Anxiety. The retirees that were surveyed were less anxious than younger people. And they were less worried, I mean, probably for good reason. They were less worried about losing their job. They didn't have to fire anyone. They didn't have kids at home who were on Zoom when they should be in class. And many of them no longer had the responsibility of caregiving. However, many of them still obviously were taking care of mates, but they didn't have the caregiving responsibility. And finally, the pandemic may be the first crisis that younger people have ever faced. And it may simply be an experience, a shock, the inability to really adjust to that as well as older people. Next. Then we come to loneliness. Well, this is not really a good story because we know certainly before the pandemic, loneliness was considered a national epidemic among older people. During the pandemic, it certainly has gotten worse, but interestingly, when the study compared younger and older people reported more frequent and more intense feelings of loneliness than older people. And many of these younger people had roommates. So it wasn't that they were alone, but they were lonely. Still, this is not a good story for either the older or younger generation. But the point of this is that younger people are even suffering more so. Next. So let's talk about resilience again. The study found that wisdom was very much connected to resilience. And that with age, they found that older adults became psychologically and spiritually just stronger. And this was despite wars, despite recessions, despite the loss of loved ones, even job failures, older adults emerged resilient. Next. Okay, so we know a little bit about older adults before the pandemic, a little bit about older adults during the pandemic. And the conclusion is this is a pretty strong group of people. So what is the blue sky? What is this discovery? Next. Well, some people are discovering they really are enjoying exercise. And we can feel inspired by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you may know her story. She hired a coach, a fitness coach, Brian Johnson. And she hired him in 1999 after she recovered from colon cancer. And then she hired him once again in 2009 as she recovered from pancreatic cancer. Johnson, in turn, wrote this book, The RBG Workout. It's a great book, how she stays strong and you can too. And the book is figures such as you would see with RBG, going through a whole series of exercises with directions. So if we're looking for inspiration, we certainly can look for towards Justice Ginsburg. But the other thing, people are exercising, many are exercising more. If you are walking around in your neighborhood, you may see a lot of people walking, and not only walking, but they're walking with dogs. And my understanding is that the shelters have actually run out of dogs to adopt because people are walking and they like to walk their dogs. Next. Next. So I think what I'm suggesting is the silver lining really is all about discovery. And one is discovering that you like exercise. 2 is learning something new, and it might be your new iPhone, or how to link or sync your iPhone to your iPad, or maybe you're starting to read things that you never read before. So learning something new, you might be taking a class. There's so many classes online now. Yale offers a class on happiness, okay? A very well subscribed class. So we have more classes, more opportunities to learn. Again, it's part of discovery. It's part of the option of a silver lining. Next. So this is not an atypical conversation. We have 2 older women discussing the following. It's been a typical day. I Skyped the grandkids, Twittered a new recipe, and Facebooked my daughter. Well, one of the things we know is that the older generation is becoming pretty tech savvy. We know 3/4 of adults are connected to the internet and use it very frequently. About 45% do have smartphones, and that Zoom is really, for many, a godsend. People have family time together. They play games. They're attending worship services. They're going to conferences that typically they could not. Next. And speaking of Zoom, the magic connection. Before you get on a Zoom call, I will predict this is the conversation you have. You're on mute. I cannot hear you. Can you hear me now? Leave meeting. So people are getting together who typically would not get together, families and generations. And I'll share with you a personal story. In March, I launched a family meeting Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. It's called Fam Time. So family members from across the country get together for an hour discussion, and we also select a topic. But we did something else. We assigned people another family member to call during the week. And when they resumed the next Sunday, they reported out to the rest of the family what they learned about their family buddy. And what has resulted is that family who kind of knew each other all of a sudden appreciated each other, such as, I never knew Cheryl had such an interesting job, or that Sam was involved with this particular project, or someone else had this art endeavor. People actually began to know each other. And my feeling is if we can leave a legacy of a family really knowing each other, liking each other, caring about each other, I think we will have done very well. May I also add, there's something called Zoom fatigue. Some of us are so zoomed out that I know for me, after 2 to 3 hours of Zoom, I can't do anything. I'm finished. So how to manage Zoom is another story and is probably another conversation. Next. People are also discovering a new community. Many of you may be acquainted with the Village and the Village movement. I happen to be a cheerleader for the Village movement. I believe in it very strongly. We are very fortunate. We had 3 villages in our own community. The South Bay Village, that is based in Torrance and surrounding towns. We have the West Side Pacific Village, which is Westchester and the west side of Los Angeles, and the Palos Verdes Peninsula Village. So what is a village? A village is not a building, it's not a condo complex. A village is a community. It is a nonprofit membership organization that helps individuals age in their own home as long as possible. It has a second function, and that is to keep older adults connected to their community through cultural and social activities, okay? So the members of a village have a very unique position in that they can provide services and they also can receive services. And before we go to the next slide, let me just mention that there are about 300 villages throughout the country, about 200 operational, about 100 in development. And there are about 67 just in California. So this is a national movement helping people age in place and stay connected. So let's go to this next slide and see what kind of services are available in the village. Well, it could be as simple as fixing a garden hose, driving, fixing a light bulb. And let me take an aside and give you a little light bulb story. I saw a video that the Pasadena village produced. And part of it went as follows. It showed a man going to the door of a woman who needed her light bulb changed. That sounds pretty simple, except if you don't have light, you're in the dark. He comes in, gets on the ladder, changes the light bulb, leaves, and the woman walks him to the door, says thank you, and tears are rolling down her cheeks. It was a moment, a simple act of kindness, like changing a light bulb, meant so much to this woman. And the man was overwhelmed that this simple task had such meaning for someone. So the recipient has gratitude and the volunteer feels good about doing good. So in addition to something like changing a light bulb, there are also visits, well visits, keeping someone company, next. And there are hiking groups, there are walking groups, next. And this is just a photo of people enjoying the company of one another. It could be having company and someone to talk to. This is pre-pandemic, no masks. Having company in your golf cart. And the people on the far right, I think they may have just enjoyed a dine around event. And people on the low left, I want you to notice that this is a peer, that we have older adults who are providing service to older adults. Okay, we also have younger volunteers, but the point is, older adults, it's a peer relationship of helping one another. And in the far right, tech support is really important. We have lots of engineers in our villages, and they're extremely helpful on tech support. Next. And of course, we have birthday celebrations, and we have happy hours. Next. And there are educational programs. There are debates. There are book groups, all kinds of opportunities for education. And it's interesting, each village reflects the needs, the personality, the culture of that village. And there's a saying, if you've seen one village, you've seen one village. And I want to just spend one more minute on this. The village reminds me of life in the 1950s. In the 1950s, everybody knew each other. People did not move away from their family as much as today. And if Mrs. Jones needed a ride to the doctor, there was someone who would take her. Or Mr. Smith, who was alone, he's sick, has a fever, someone would bring him chicken soup. So what the village is creating is natural communities, very natural, that we had years gone by. But now it just takes a little work to create these caring, enriched communities. And that's what the village is about. Next. But speaking about the village makes us think about our neighborhood. One of the silver linings, if you will, is that neighbors are learning about neighbors. One way is they are walking their dogs and they're walking in their neighborhoods and they're meeting people next door. So I have a friend in Connecticut who has done a lot of travel globally, never home. She's now on quarantine, has been in her house for years, doesn't know any of her neighbors. So she did something very creative. She took some chalk and wrote a message on the sidewalk of many of her neighbors. But in addition to that, she wrote personal notes and put them in the mailbox. The response was overwhelming. It was as though someone was waiting for somebody to connect these people, all quarantined, no one knew each other, and it was very effective. So this was one very creative way of discovering your neighborhood, and I would suggest part of the silver lining. Next. And we have people are finding a new sense of purpose, again, discovery. There are so many small and large organizations that are helping people get out the vote. Great movement. There are people who are involved with climate change and world peace. There are people who are finding purpose in just caring, do an act of kindness with someone else. And I want to mention one more. I really look at this kind of intergenerationally. The Emeriti Center at USC, which is a center for soon to retire or retired faculty, is having older adults, older retirees actually from USC, helping students fill out their college application and writing their statement. But the help can be reciprocal. At the same time, the Emeriti Center is having students, USC students, call retired and older USC alums to reach out and say, hello, how are you? And what I want to emphasize here is the sense of purpose can be reciprocal with older people reaching out to younger people. And it can be very simple. Certainly it can be to your grandchildren, but maybe to someone else's grandchildren or a young family that you know is struggling, and a phone call that says, you know, I think times are tough. Is there anything I can do to help? So the sense of purpose is certainly for nonprofit organizations, for other older adults. But I think we can also look how we extend ourselves to the younger generation and how we can be so helpful, knowing we are the resilient generation. Next. Then there's creativity. Certainly businesses are figuring out how to be creative just to stay in business. I live in Redondo Beach, and if you go down Catalina Avenue, you will see that the restaurants have moved in the street, and they have created it in a festive way. It's almost like a street fair. But people also individually are becoming creative. Referring back to Dr. Gene Cohen, who's written a great deal about creativity and aging. And he wrote that with age, creativity can actually increase because we use both sides of our brain, which helps in problem solving as well as creativity. And he also wrote, certainly among artists and people who are creative, that in later life, we may create fewer things, but what we create may be the best we have ever done in our entire lives. So people are finding creativity in a variety of ways. They are taking music lessons and singing lessons. I have a friend who's taking plein air art classes. People are discovering all ways to be creative. And I'll share with you another story, a personal story. The holiday of Yom Kippur is a Jewish holiday, and it's typical a day of fast. And traditionally there is a break the fast meal, which I have been doing and hosting for 50 years. So how can we have a celebration with our family and friends, and we can't see each other. We can see each other remotely, but we can't be with each other. So with the help of my daughter, I got some boxes, which are beautiful gift boxes. And I invited about 13, 15 people, and I filled each gift box with all the food that you typically would have if you came to my home for a break the fast. So we called it a break the fast in a box. Beautifully wrapped tissue paper with a label. The day before, I had people come to my driveway a certain time to pick up their boxes, which they did. So I got to see everyone. And the next day, we had a Zoom break the fast, all sharing the same food. So maybe we're going to have Thanksgiving in a box. Maybe we'll soon to have something Christmas in a box. Anyhow, that was my attempt at creativity in trying to keep a family tradition when we actually couldn't be face to face. Next. So another discovery is that people are gardening, and they even like to garden. And not only do they garden, but they harvest, and then they share their goods with neighbors and friends. It's interesting, if you go on the internet about what to bake, the titles are fascinating. It's what can I bake in a quarantine? What are the easy desserts to make in a quarantine? And we know that stores ran out of yeast because everybody is baking bread. So yes, there are a lot of people who are eating well, but I have to say there are some people who are not eating so well. You know about the COVID-19 syndrome, which is equivalent to gaining 19 pounds during COVID-19. So not everyone, but we hope more people will discover that eating well is enjoyable and also healthy. Next. This is a period of reflection and can be considered part of the silver lining. My sense is that during this period of time, time has taken on a different kind of meaning, a little bit more precious. And it has given all of us a time to reset. I mean, when we were quarantined, and I don't know if you recall, when women would get together, the first conversation was, what are you going to do about your hair? Are you going to continue coloring your hair? Oh, and if not, do you know how we can purchase something to color it ourselves? And are you going to get it cut? And how long are you going to let it go? So hair became a big thing, and men let their beards grow and their hair grow and their side. So hair became important. But then things moved down a little bit more significantly. What is really essential in our lives? What is the most important thing at this life stage? Knowing that life is fragile, our planet is fragile, everything feels fragile. So for many, this has been a period of self-discovery. I have a colleague who was involved in sales, and she said, I never knew that I was an introvert. I actually like being home. I never would have known that. I thought I was an extrovert, but no, I really like being home. People are discovering the importance of what is called self-care. One person said, I've been so busy taking care of everyone, I haven't taken care of myself. I realize this is something I have to do now for myself. So we look at what is essential. Were the haircuts, manicures, pedicures essential? Well, maybe they weren't at the beginning of the pandemic, but now that businesses have opened up, we can be a little bit more flexible. But what has come out, particularly my colleague and I, Bernice Bratter, are hosting something called Renewment Roundtables, where we have career women who are going through transition and change, getting together in what we call virtual roundtables for interesting discussions. And one of the very consistent points that have emerged, particularly during this period of reflection, is the importance of relationships with our children, with our grandchildren, with our friends. That has emerged in many of our conversations as one of the most important resets, if you will, and the importance of allocating time for those relationships. So I'd like to suggest that reflection is really an opportunity and part of the silver lining. Next. So I had to include this slide because this is about possibilities. This is about Harriet Thompson. Harriet Thompson is a cancer survivor, is a classical, she died a few years ago, was a classical pianist, and she also was a marathon runner. She started running at the age of 76, and at the age of 94, she finished the San Diego Marathon in 7 hours, 24 minutes, and 36 seconds. And at 92, she actually ran a half marathon at 92, a full marathon at 94. And I also was told she didn't even take a bathroom stop in the San Diego Marathon. And I mention this because of the notion of possibilities. She didn't start running until she was 50, ran her first marathon at 76. I mention this because I want to suggest that none of us should think of as age as limiting our possibilities. I don't think I have run for about 40 years. I'm never a modest runner. I'm never going to be a marathon runner. I don't want to be, and I never will be. So that may not be a goal or objective, but to think about the possibilities. We're living longer. We are a healthier generation. We have more opportunities. And so the message to me from Harriet Thompson is set your agenda large, go for it, and don't be fooled by thinking because of age and solely age, you can't do it. Next. So what is the message in all of this? Well, I want to suggest that thrive is an attitude. Thrive is an intention. And if our MO is to only survive, I think we're cheating ourselves out of a good part of life. So I want to suggest that we adopt thrive as our message. Next. And review the checklist. think about yourself for a moment. Can you think of something you're doing that you're getting better at? What are you getting better at? Okay. And are you just good at something, which is adequate? You're okay. Are you developing? Are you growing? Are you expanding yourself, your knowledge, your emotional capacity, your giving? Are you growing? And are you grateful? Do you feel fortunate at the end of the day? Can you write a gratitude list for your health, for your family, for your work, for your stability? And do you feel good about life and yourself? So many of you are able to check many of these boxes. But another way to look at this checklist is to say, what can I improve on? What can I get better at? What way can I grow myself? What are the other aspects of feeling gratitude and being aware of such good things in life and gifts? And if I don't feel good about life and myself, what can I do to make that better? Next. So I want to suggest we're in a new time. We're a time of increased longevity, increased opportunity, and it's an encore time. It's actually a time to thrive. Next. And I'd like to suggest that we adopt the philosophy of that great philosopher, Charles Schulz, and that life is a 10-speed bicycle, and most of us have gears that we never use. So I'd like to suggest we think about the gears that we never use, think about how we can use them to not only survive, but to survive, and to remember the closing note of Dr. James Beering, that we should all have good days. And my belief is these are all possibilities for each one of us. So Julie, I think that wraps it up for thriving during the pandemic. And if we have some questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Okay, so that was fabulous, Helen. Thank you. We've had a couple come in, and really a couple people, both Donna and Carol, were asking, how do they find out more information about villages in their area?
I'm sorry, how do they find out about villages?
Villages in their areas.
Okay, I would suggest they look up something called Village to Village Network, and they will have a listing of all the villages in your geographic area.
That's great. I'm just typing that in. Village to Village, what was it?
Village to Village Network.
Okay. Yeah, other than that, there's just been great comments where people have said, oh, you know, I've been in your retirement 2.0 class. You know, how much they just appreciate you being here. Let me check. I think another question just came in. Where do you go to get emotional help? That's a great question.
It's a really important question because during the pandemic, the mental health is really at risk. Therapists are extremely busy. So a number of things. One is call a counselor or therapist. Check if there's a support group. Call your hospital and ask if there is a support group. So that's another. I would also say if you are part of a faith-based organization, go to them for some counseling and support. There are mental health helplines, and I don't have them handy. If that person wants to leave an email address with you in the chat room, I can forward some mental health resources. But don't ignore the mental health aspect, particularly among older adults who are living alone. It's again, we know that mental health increases with age. We know that women and men in later life are resilient, but we are facing, as they say, unprecedented times.
We definitely are. And if anybody wants to send a follow-up question to Helen, they can send it to events@SCNG, Southern California News Group, scng.com. We did have Dale saying, don't forget about Omnilore in the South Bay for lifelong learning. Cal State
Okay,
Dominguez Hills.
thank you for that important addition. Omnilore is a great program for adult learning. And what is so great about it is that the members of Omnilore are learners either as students or as teachers. It is a great program, fabulous people, a great network and community. So highly recommended, and thank you for suggesting that.
Yeah, that's good information. I love this next one. And this is Lily, and she says, I'm a high school senior, and I'm wondering how I can get in contact with someone from Amerity Center to help me with my college apps. I'm writing my personal statement about my experience with my senior citizens club. Awesome.
Okay, I think that if she would write her email on the chat room, I will connect her to the director of the Ameriti Center.
Or like I said, you could just go to events at scng.com, Ivy, or Lily, and I will forward that information as well.
Excellent. That's even better. That's
yeah,
better.
yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
let's see. There's a couple more. I think we got a couple more minutes if you're okay with that, Helen.
Oh, sure.
Let's see. Are there any? Oh, okay. This one's kind of cut off, but asking about safe Zoom networks to link with. I think everybody's a little anxious about, they've heard things at the beginning that people were being hacked into Zoom, and I think that's where this person is asking about. How do we find, online things that we can feel comfortable with?
I'm not sure. I have not had any problem with Zoom. And I think that's a fear, and I don't know if we are overreacting, but I would not let the fear stop you from engaging in this kind of digital communication. I think in most cases, we're okay. I think the worst that can happen is you've heard of something called Zoom bombing, and someone enters your Zoom conversation and says horrible things, and it's very disruptive. But our personal security is not at stake. So I guess I would have to think about the answer to that. I would just say Zoom is okay, and not to let the fear interfere with learning how to use it.
And let's we'll finish up on this one, and that is, and following back on the Omnilore. I know you mentioned it a little bit. Monica is asking, is that adult learning?
It is adult learning, and we had it's omnilore.org, and it is adult learning. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I think it's a good time to close. We've had an awfully informative session, Helen. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the people who joined us today. We are having a few more webinars, so please feel free to go to Healthy Living Virtual Expo, and if you just Google that, it'll come up and you can see our website. And with that, I just hope everybody has a great day, and thank you again.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Stay well and stay safe.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye now.